Hello and welcome to Mandala Theatre Company's panel discussion about speaking out and what Black Lives Matter means to us. I'm Yasmin Sidhwa, I'm the artistic director, and I'm here with three young people from Mandala Young Company, because for us, Mandala is all about telling the stories of injustice, of inequality. And so it was really important that we have this discussion between us and to hear from young people about their views. So they're each going to introduce themselves and we're going to talk through what we feel about speaking out. So that's starting with you, Rhiannon, please.
Hiya, I'm Rhiannon, or Rhi, some of you might know me as. I am white British. My mum is originally from Shropshire and my dad was from Buckinghamshire. So I just think it's so important to speak out this time. I've been literally, I think since it started, I've just been sharing and going and finding loads of things to post and just because I don't know, I actually know quite a few people who haven't really wanted to spam the news feeds with all of this stuff, and also I know a lot of people are getting really frustrated by it. But my personal view on it is that, for example, on Facebook, I know that regardless of the fact that with my background through uni and theatre, I get so much sort of intel and news all the time from all different places, and I know so much about what's going on because of my sort of bubble, if you like, my uni bubble. But I know that my Facebook touches sort of people who might not have that. Because I grew up through the church and stuff, so I have a lot of other families and middle-aged people. I have my grandparents, stuff like that, people who might not get this stuff from social media. So I'm constantly just sharing articles, petitions, everything, just to spread awareness, educate people, because I think that's one of the most important things at the minute is that the UK, we like to say that we're so great at inclusivity and stuff like that, but actually even the schools and curriculums that do include Black history or history besides white British history, it's still so limited and people just don't know anything. So I for me, one of the most the biggest things about speaking out at this point is just to get this, make sure everybody's educated and understand why this is so important, because this has been going on for years and it needs to stop. It needs to, we're all equal. So
really that's great, Rhiannon, because I think, there is an exhaustion of, oh, I've heard this, why are they going on about that? And it's particularly important that you're from a white background and you're prepared to speak out about what's been going on. And we're going to come and talk later about what it means in terms of white privilege. And I didn't say my background, which I'm mixed race, dual heritage, white and Asian. So my father's from India and my mum was from Yorkshire. So yeah, I'm really pleased that you are getting out there and speaking and talking and having these conversations, because it's not enough to sort of go, oh, people are sick of their social media being.
It doesn't matter that they're sick of it. It hasn't changed. So until it changes, I'm going to keep doing it.
Absolutely. I'm coming to you on this, Lewis, as well. So why do you think we need to speak out?
Hi, I'm Lewis. I was born in Angola. My dad is from Angola and my mom's from Kenya. I would say my culture is more Kenyan because in England, more of my Kenyan family are here. So obviously I was raised more by my Kenyan family. But the thing is, we need to speak out, and it's not like we need to speak out now. We need to speak out all the time, because if we don't speak out, who will? And the thing is, we gotta say it bluntly, England is racist, okay? It is. And the thing is, a lot of people want to act innocent and ignorant, and that's not an excuse, because there's a lot of places where we got slave owner statues. Now, you can't say England is not racist and you have statues like that when Black people walk past it, it's a reminder that our people were oppressed. And even though we haven't got our physical chains, seeing those statues is still a reminder that we had them, and now we have like an invisible chain. So we got to constantly speak out. And when you speak to Black people, the thing is, you always hear an injustice or something that's happened to them, whether it be in school, whether it be by the police, or whether it be just by a normal bystander. You hear it. And for Black people, it's a thing where it's normal to hear it. And that's the thing that we need to change. It's normal for Black people to hear other Black people go through injustice. And then when white people hear it, you have some white people where they're shocked by it, and then you have some white people where they think that we're overreacting by it. And this is the thing, it's not an reaction when it's constantly happening to you. When it's constantly happening to your family, to your brothers and to your sisters, it becomes tiring. Like I've been going to quite a few protests, and it's tiring to constantly have to tell people and speak out, yo, we need our rights too. And then you have obviously people saying all lives matter and stuff like that, and it's just more and more tiring, and we need to speak out, otherwise nobody else will.
I know, and I mean, I think also that, you know, there are a lot of Black people who have been speaking out for 400 years, but now there are some Black people who are finding it too much, that it's like they're so enraged or upset that it's really hard to speak out and keep it together, because you know, it's almost the whole George Floyd murder has brought it out again and again and again, but it's almost like seeing it again and still the same things are carrying on. So, you know, I think it is really good that you do have to keep speaking out. We all have to, but you can understand the exhaustion, like 400 years of ancestry of people fighting this racist structure, and still we're almost in step one, you know.
And the thing is, we can't be scared to call out our own friends and our own family, because I think that's where people kind of like, they don't really push it, where when a friend says something or where a family member says something, you kind of just step back and you just let it happen even though you don't agree with it. I think we need to, like, a lot of people need to question and tell that family member or friend that, yo, you can't say that, that's the wrong mindset.
Totally. Anusha, I'm going to bring you in on this. I think we'll probably all talk, because I think we're coming from different perspectives as well.
I think Lewis is kind of reiterating a lot of the thoughts I've been having recently as well. I think the main one you
want to introduce yourself first. Anusha.
Sorry, yes. Hi, my name's Anusha. Most of you know me as Noosh. I was born in Oxford, but I come from an Indian and Pakistani background culturally. So Lewis kind of saying the UK isn't innocent. I think that's something that really needs to be pushed, especially for people who are in that denial phase. If, you know, the UK isn't as bad, it's like, you know, we're pretty tolerant. I think that whole perspective is so flawed to the core. And I think I remind people of Dave's performance at the Brits, where he says, they tell us we should be grateful we're the least racist. The least racist is still racist. And if someone hasn't said it, quality is a right, it doesn't deserve credit. And I think that has to be repeated again and again. And that's why I think that I almost feel like this whole thing of, you know, I'm posting, I'm doing this, it's not so that we get any credit. It's not so we're like, oh, thank you, and thank you for helping. It's no, thank yous aren't involved in this. You know, this is not we're doing anyone any favors. This is a fight for justice, for equality, for equity. Like this is so much bigger than, you know, we're pretty okay compared to other places. I think that is one of the main things I took from Lewis's comment. And I think the whole thing of calling each other out, no matter who they are, no matter if they're our parents, no matter if they're our friends. I think I'll touch on this more in the next question, but especially in the South Asian community, the respect for elders sometimes might stop us from calling, you know, our elders out in the community when they are saying something that's harmful towards Black people in particular. And I think it's just enough is enough, you know, and we have to be relentless in calling each other out. We have to be relentless in protesting and in speaking out. And I think, Rhiannon, what you were saying about people being tired and frustrated of seeing this on their timelines and Insta stories, people have been suffering for 400 years, and you're tired because a few weeks of your Instagram stories have been filled up with resources on how to be actively anti-racist. Get over yourself. Get over yourself. Like, I'm so angry. That makes me so angry that people are literally on their Instas like, oh, I can't wait for this to blow over so that I can finally go back to seeing selfies of dogs and food. It's like ridiculous. It makes me so angry. Sorry, I'm going to calm down, but like, it just does enrage me. So that's what I would say on why we have to speak out, why it's so vital. Silence is complacency. It's being complicit, and we can't. Silence is betrayal. We can't stay silent.
I know, and it does sometimes feel difficult because you can be in a meeting with people who you think, God, these people are so kind and generous and helpful and open-minded, but they haven't said anything about Black Lives Matter. They haven't spoken about it. And you know, I'm not saying every conversation has to be about it, but if you haven't heard people that you know or speak up, then you do have to challenge it, because, but as you said, Anusha, it's being complicit. You have to be actively anti-racist. It's not enough to say I'm not racist. So I am going to come back to you, Anusha, to talk about privilege, because I know you've thought a lot about this. So yeah, it'd be great to get your view on privilege.
So I think I want to talk in particular about brown privilege, being from a South Asian background. Even though white supremacy is a common origin for both the Black and South Asian community suffering colonialism and racism, the South Asian community have continued to contribute to anti-Blackness, which I think does need to be confronted. I think brown privilege is something that's not talked about or acknowledged enough. I think white privilege is at the center of this, which it does need to be for obvious reasons. But I think that doesn't mean that we don't stand up to our elders and people in our community who have such harmful and racial views, prejudices against Black people. I think that brown privilege stems from the really harmful pre-colonial ideology that white people are better than brown people and brown people are better than Black people, which is disgusting. And I completely, obviously don't agree with this, but it has been deep-rooted in the South Asian community. And I think that what we need to confront is that we as South Asians benefit from anti-Blackness because it allows us to not be the target. And that's why it's so important for us to speak out. Having said that, even though there are so many aspects of the South Asian community that do contribute to anti-Blackness and need to be called out, I recently saw this video by a Black actor from London called Zachariah, and he was directed towards South Asians and Arabs in particular, and he said, listen, to my South Asian and my Arab friends, it's really important for you guys to center and uplift Black voices in this time. And the danger of talking about these issues within your community is that you're conflating the issue of a Black man being murdered by the police with the taboo of Black marriage or colorism in your community. They are both obviously issues that need to be addressed, but very different severity of issues. And I think he also said, by doing this, we're rushing to avoid and to get rid of this discomfort that we have felt by being silent for this long, that it's taken a Black man to be murdered by the police for us to speak up to our own community and to address this in our own community. And that by doing so, we're actually to an extent diminishing the importance of both of these issues. I think it's not a case at all of not confronting or speaking out about this within our South Asian community, but it's about doing so without centering this as our own issue and without making it about us. I think what we really need to focus on is educating ourselves on Black history. We need to be educating ourselves on the deep-rooted institutional racism that exists and continues to exist. We need to concentrate on defunding the police. We need to concentrate on decolonizing our education. And the only way we can do this is by standing together completely united and not taking no for an answer. So that's what I have to say on brown privilege.
Well, which is really brave, because, you know, it's a bit like the All Lives Matter thing. Of course, there are other issues. Of course, there are other struggles. But the struggle that we need to focus on is about the struggle in terms of Black racism that has been going on for so long. And it is a different form of oppression to what brown privilege, which obviously I have as well as being a mixed race woman. You know, it is a different oppression that has been going on for so long. And I think probably now is the time to also talk about that we haven't got rid of slavery. The incarceration of over 2 million people in American prisons, especially, where they are then used as labor, free labor, for some of the biggest corporates. It's slavery in another form. It's like the structural system has been clever. It's just shifted the way it's done, so we're not as aware of it. But if you immediately target a Black person for a really minor offence or even no offence, and they're going to immediately be incarcerated, and they need the labour in there. It, you know, people need to watch 13th that I've posted that's on Netflix. It's a documentary and it absolutely calls this out. And in the UK, the numbers, Black men are 26% more likely to be remanded in custody than white men. I mean, you know, it's not okay in the UK. It really isn't. The structural racism exists, and you know, as you're saying, Anusha, we've got to call it out. We've got to be aware. We can't just pretend, because it's all about divide and rule. That's how this works. Divide us and say that this one's a bit better than this one and this one's better than that one, and then you can keep control. So yeah, it's so important. So I just want to come to you and Rhiannon to talk about white privilege.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, like yourself and Anusha have kind of made a lot of points that definitely go across kind of the board, but I kind of want to open by saying that there's nothing that I find more frustrating than when, like, you see people talking about white privilege and a white person says, oh, but I've had a really hard life. And it's like, nobody's saying that you haven't had a hard life. Nobody is saying that you haven't had it difficult. What we're saying is you haven't had it difficult because of the color of your skin. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the key things that unfortunately so many people don't understand, is that there's a massive difference between white privilege and privilege. White privilege, you have inherited this because of what our ancestors have done. And it's also, I think it's that people are uncomfortable with the idea of white privilege because they feel guilty. I feel guilty all the time. And I hated that at first, because of course you hate it. You feel like nobody wants to feel guilty for something that at the end of the day, I obviously wasn't there, didn't have any control or whatever. But that's my point. Like, I'm really glad that I feel that guilt, that white guilt, because it means that I recognize that this is wrong and this shouldn't be happening. And that's where you then, once you've recognized that you have that privilege and that this shouldn't be happening, that's where you then need to use it. So, and people use it really badly as well. So you've got, I'm sure everybody's seen that horrendous video of that awful woman phoning up the police and screaming down the phone, literally changing her voice in seconds to say that a black man is threatening her when all he's doing is saying, please put your dog on the lead. And that, I get really so worked up. It really upset me that somebody could use their kind of privilege in that way to ultimately potentially harm somebody else. Sorry, I find it really horrible. But like, then you get the other people, which is brilliant, where they use it for so much better. And there's stories about a group of white women linking arms to protect the protesters from the police. You know, there's people, a lot of my friends and a lot of us recently, we're all joining together and doing various things. Like I've just signed up to write some articles for one of my friends' collective magazines, which and I've decided because I think it's so important, like a lot of what you've taught me about, a lot of what I've researched myself about post-colonialism and hidden histories and lost voices and all of those stories. So I'm now going to be a column writer for that, in which I'm going to look at lots of different histories and stuff that people don't know about, because again, that I think it just comes down to education. And I guess I'm just going to round out by saying again, like, white privilege is not something that you can't not have it. If you're white, like, you have it, you're born with it, you inherit it. It doesn't mean that you are a bad person. It doesn't mean that you haven't had a hard life. It means that you should be using the privilege that you have because you're white to do something about everything that's going on at the minute, and these years of torment that you didn't have to go through. So do something about it, you know.
And I think it's really good to name the guilt and the shame, because everybody who isn't black has got to feel that to some extent, because why has it carried on for so long?
Yeah, and
go on.
Sorry, sort of a few questions, like conversations I have had with people, is people have started to talk about the whole what you guys are saying about all lives matter. And honestly, my opinion on anybody who says all lives matter, oh gosh, sorry, my laptop's running low. Anybody who says all lives matter, I think, are people who are just terrified of their own guilt and can't, like, they're so uncomfortable with it that they're like, yeah, but everybody matters. And it's like, yeah, everybody does matter, but right now this is what matters, because this is the problem, this is what needs to change.
Absolutely.
Sorry. I'll calm down now.
I'm just gonna say, Lewis, do you want to comment on white or brown privilege? And
I mean, I'll say a little thing, but I think obviously there is definitely white privilege. To be fair, I haven't really realized too much on like the brown privilege too much, but definitely for white people, I think they, as Rhiannon said, they definitely need to realize that just because you have white privilege doesn't mean you're a bad person. Okay, it just means that black people, we get like our lives are harder purely because of our skin color, and that's it. And every day is like we wake up and like I wake up every day and I'm just confused because I'm like, why is it that my skin color makes it harder for me to live a life? Because it doesn't make sense. And then when people come to me and say, yo, I have a hard life too, I'm like, okay, yeah, I get that, but it's not because of your skin. But yeah, that's about it that I'll say for that. But
well, I think
like,
really, that's it. So I've had conversations with, again, people that are meant to be very open, very left-wing, very liberal, and they're saying, so we can't, we are stopping, shutting us up, because basically there are all sorts of struggles. We want to speak out against religion, we want to speak out freedom of speech, you're stopping freedom of speech, you know, there are many other struggles. And you go, yeah, there are, but the ones where they're about your essence, who you are, your skin color, your cultural, you know, the way you look, you can't change that. And if you're being if your life is being made into just impossible because of the way you look, then how can anybody say that any other struggle can be more important than that?
Exactly. And the thing is with that is like, it's so frustrating. Like, it's something that you can't change. Like, I'm born this way, I can't change it. So why do I get treated like this? And the thing is like, it makes black people not like their skin because of that. It makes black people not like their hair because of that. You wanna, like, there's times where people, they will straighten their hair because they think, okay, maybe if I straighten my hair, people will like me more. And we shouldn't have to feel like that. Because I've straightened my hair before, thinking, yeah, I'll look more beautiful if I straighten my hair. but no, I just look silly because it's not me. It's not me. So I just don't get why we have to feel like that because of our skin.
There's a whole conversation about that, about
Yeah.
the way we look, and Black people's self-worth. Not only are they having this, and we're going to come on to talk about structural and systemic racism, but it's internalized, that feeling, you know, because I've got Black children and my husband's Black, I can talk about this from hearing them speak, an internalized sense of lacking self-worth because you are not shown in the story of the country that you live in to be worthy of anything more than being a criminal character or a secondary character or not even mentioned in the stories. So
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And definitely for white people, use that privilege to help people. Because you have it, so use it to help people, because it does help. There's many videos of like Black people getting in trouble with the police when the white people come and they use their privilege and then they stop it. So it does work. So use it and then help us.
I'm going to come to you, Anusha. We seem to have lost Rhiannon.
Yeah, I think she's trying to get back. I just really quickly wanted to say on the All Lives Matter thing, I think Billie Eilish put this on her Instagram, and I thought it was a really great way to kind of address the All Lives Matter people who are saying that, is that if there's someone's arm was bleeding, would you go around giving a plaster to everyone in the world, even though one person's arm was bleeding, just in case other people's arms started bleeding? Because one person's arm is bleeding, so they're the ones that need the plaster. And I think that's just like the simplest way to kind of address that whole argument. It's not even an argument, it's the stupid thing I've heard, because all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. So do you know what I mean? I think it's just very, very closed-minded and very stupid argument. Do you want me to talk on the next question?
Yeah, so we're going to talk about structural and systemic racism in both the UK and the US, because I'm just going to, here comes Rhiannon again, I'll just get her back onto this. So yeah, if you keep going, Anusha.
Okay. I think with this question, it's important to firstly understand what systemic racism is. The way I like to kind of describe it is that it's the ways in which white supremacy is captured in everyday thinking at a systems level, and which disadvantages BAME people in particular. It's a cycle of injustice that is designed to keep BAME people at the bottom of the ladder. And where is this seen? It's seen in schools and education. For one, there's a study that shows teachers have lower expectations of BAME pupils, in particular Black Caribbean pupils. And not only the expectations of teachers, but it's also seen in our colonized education, where it's to cover up the shame of the US and the UK, of their guilt in how they've exerted injustice on ethnic minorities for centuries. It's seen in hiring practices, the fact that a white person is way more likely to get the job than a Black, Asian, minority ethnic person who has the exact same qualifications. It's seen in wealth gaps, it's seen in unemployment figures, it's seen in, like you said, the mass incarceration of Black men in the USA, which is not only just completely unjust, but it's all stemmed from this whole war on drugs started by Nixon and Reagan. And the fact that even after serving their sentences, this is something I can't really quite understand, even after serving time, they are denied their right to vote, which is completely inhumane. It's completely unacceptable. I think another thing I'd say is, like, people need to do their research. They need to take the initiative to learn about where systemic racism is and where it is currently and how we can stop it and dismantle it. I think systemic racism is arguably the scariest and most harmful type of racism, because it's been disguised and overlooked for so many years by so many people. And it's even harder to dismantle when we've got people like Boris Johnson and Donald Trump as our world leaders, two completely racist idiots who are our world leaders and who we need to be in this fight with us. Ideally, we'd be in a world where our world leaders were in a fight with us, which we don't have. But that doesn't mean we stop. It means we fight even more for systemic racism to be not only recognized, to be publicly acknowledged, and to be completely dismantled, and we're not going to stop until that happens.
No, absolutely. I mean, obviously in America, there is the system's even more extreme. Like I watching 13th and that whole thing, that once you've been given a criminal record, that you cannot vote. Therefore, if you can't vote, and you won't be given a right to live in society then, because you can't change anything. But it doesn't mean in the UK that the systems are not the same, that, you know, there are so many studies about, right from the beginning, black boys being excluded from school. And this is the next project that Mandala is working on, about what happens so early, where you are seen because of the way you might behave, but because of a stereotypical view of you, that already you're a failure. So you then start to be taken down that whole pipeline into exclusion. And once you're excluded from school, how difficult it is to then come back into, you know, being able to get a job, having the qualifications. You're more likely to be groomed into a gang because of the need to survive. And so that, you know, that alone from such a young age, where the system is working against you, and where, you know, I'm going to let you, Lewis, talk about more of this, because obviously the whole thing of how, you know, so often you won't get to interview if your name is different. You know, that's going to already stop you even being shortlisted. And then when you're seen in interview, how likely are you to get the job? So many things that you've talked about, Anusha. I was thinking that we might have 2 lots of discussions, but I sort of feel we are in the midst of this discussion about Black Lives Matter and about structural racism. And I sort of feel we just need to keep our focus on it, and even if it's long for people to watch on Facebook Live, they can come back to it, because I'm going to repost it. So I just want us to keep going, because I had said we might stop and then do another one next week. So Lewis, just coming to you, to talk about your view on structural and systemic racism.
Okay, well, it's definitely there, and I'm going to start by saying my cousin, I think when he was in 6th form, or when he was doing GCSEs, right, he was in his class and he was kind of being naughty, so him and his like friends got like kicked out of class. But when the teacher was talking to them, she said to them, "You're going to fail." And it wasn't because they were speaking and they were misbehaving. She said they're going to fail because of their skin color. And that baffled me, because I was like, she could have said, "Yo, you're going to fail because you're not concentrating, you're misbehaving." But nah, she said because of your skin color. So that confused me, because I was like, that don't make sense. Like, out of all the things that could be the cause for them to fail, would be because of their skin color. And I want to say he didn't fail. He actually got good grades, so that was good. But black boys are like 3 times more likely to get excluded, and not only that, they're 3 times more likely to be permanently excluded. Now, with this thing of oppression, it starts in schools, okay? Because if we're getting excluded, we're not being educated. And if we're not being educated, then where do black boys go? They go to the streets. Because if they're not in school, they have nowhere else to go. And when that happens, what happens? They get into like crime and stuff like that. And this is why we need more communities where like Mandala Young Company, where it takes these black boys out of crime and brings them into something else. Okay? And not only that, I think with the policing as well, it's a way they put fear into us. So they oppress us through fear. And I think the other day I found out that since 1990, the police have killed 1,500 people. And do you want to know how many of those police officers got convicted? None of them. Imagine that. They're killing people and none of them got convicted.
You're talking about in the UK, aren't you? Because
this is the UK. This is the UK.
US, yeah.
And black boys are more likely to come in like violent contact with the police. So we're more likely to get killed by the police. So that number is crazy. 1,500 and not a single officer got convicted. Now that should tell you straight away how institutional and systematic racism is like in the UK. Okay, and yeah.
What do you feel? What do you have a fear when you're in the street and you see police there? Does it change
like,
your way of being?
The thing is, I don't know if it's like every black boy, but for me, when I see the police on the street, I try my hardest to look the least aggressive, to look the least threatening. There's sometimes where like I go like to the shop at night time, and if there's like a white lady in front of me, I cross the road because I don't want to look threatening. That don't make it shouldn't be like that. Why should I have to cross the road because I don't want to look threatening to you? When it's a police officer in the car or riding their bike, I put my hood down because I don't want to look threatening. I don't want them to come up to me and question me. And the thing is, black parents have so much anxiety and PTSD because every time I leave the house or if I go to the protest nowadays, my mum always says to me, be careful. It's not be careful of the people there, it's be careful of the police. Because even though the police are supposed to be here to protect us, my mum understands that they're not here to protect black people. They're going to hurt us. And my dad, like sometimes when we leave the house as a group to go to the bus stop to go somewhere, my dad always says, get your ID, because in case the police stop us, we need to show them the ID. So he understands that just us walking to the bus stop, we could get in trouble and we need to have our ID on us. It's just these little things that white people and other people don't go through, but it's so much anxiety for black people to have every day of our lives, just to not be threatening to other people, because we're told that we're threatening. When we have hoodies, it's like we can't be. I got told, I used to work in JD, right? And I got told by a security guard that in London, a group of black boys can't go into a JD store, only one at a time. One at a time. They can't all go as a group because they might steal something. How crazy is that? Only one at a time. If you're in a group of black boys, you can't go into a JD store. So why is it like that? Why is it that we constantly have to live with this anxiety that we might be stopped by the police, attacked by the police, just purely because of our skin color? We have to always be on guard. It shouldn't be like that.
Totally. I mean, and this is why, yeah, white people need to understand their privilege, because this is the example of how a black person has, and especially a black male, has to think, and how parents have to think, because it's not automatic that you're going to walk out the house and be all right. You're not.
Exactly.
And yeah, this is what we have to look at, because why should you live like that? Why? And similarly, just to talk about, you know, black women, this whole thing that black women are angry and feisty, and they, you know, if they've got a big chip on their shoulder and they're bullies, and you know, that this whole prejudice, and maybe black women have become more outspoken because in a way they've had to be the ones that do speak out, because the men are frightened to speak out because they're going to immediately be attacked or seen as threatening. So the women are feeling like, well, and also there's anger within how you're feeling, but also it's not good enough to go, they're loud and they're violent and they're bullying and they're noisy. That's a stereotype. And so there's so many stereotypes that are part of, in a way, this prejudice that is part of the structural and systemic conditions that black people live under. That, you know, we're pointing out little moments, but when you add them all up to a lifetime of why it's so much harder to achieve, to get status, to be given power, to have wealth, then you start to understand it.
Yeah, because it can be taken away from us at any point. At any point. The thing is, we could get status, and then you still see where police officers are stopping black people because they don't believe it's their car. Yeah. They don't believe it's their car. Because what? Because he's black. Why can't he have that car because he's black? He can't have money because he's black.
Absolutely. Rhiannon, do you want to talk on this subject, on structural and systemic racism, or shall we move on to the next question?
I had a brief thing to say. It's just when you started talking about like Black women stuff, and I was thinking about the fact that something that I keep thinking about sort of recently is that one of my friends who actually is also doing the magazine that I was saying about, she's been speaking out about various problems probably since the early years of secondary school, and has like been trying to, you know, do all of this sort of thing for years. And it's just interesting that you said about how they're perceived, you know, Black women are perceived to be angry and aggressive and everything, because I can tell you absolute confidence that is how she was perceived at school, is this angry girl who's just, you know, putting all this stuff out there. And it's like, I just find it incredible to now watch her kind of spearhead all of this stuff, because I'm like, you know, she's been doing this for however long and nobody wanted to listen. And now that it's the movement, it's like, you know, and I just think that's really ridiculous. Because I imagine that if it had been me, maybe doing those things back in secondary school, I imagine a lot more people would probably have listened to me just because I'm white. And that's awful. I hate that.
Well,
but yeah, that's kind of my experience of that.
And it's like being given permission. So, you know, it just about all right because of what's happened in terms of George Floyd, that now there is permission to speak out. Where and it, again, it's as you were all saying earlier on, how long are we going to be able to keep speaking out? Because we can't stop, but there'll come a point where people will go, that's enough. We don't want to do any more on this. And this is where we absolutely cannot stop. It's no good just speaking out. Then it has to be action that's taken by everyone. And it's something that I was talking about today in a group that I'm in about, you know, white privilege. The thing that's not going to change is that white people have to share. They're going to have to share power. They're going to have to give up some of their power in order for there to be an equality. And obviously, you know, there's more to that than just in terms of racial prejudice. Obviously, there's economic inequality, but a lot of the people that have that economic inequality are Black people. And so, you know, the speaking out is the first stage, and if enough people speak out, then we start to look at what the systems are that will make the change. So I'm going to come to talking about protest, because that is our next form of action. So Anusha, yeah, do you want to talk about protest and what that means to you?
Yeah, I think the power of protest is unity. I think the importance of protest is, it's us being actively anti-racist. And in the words of Angela Davis, it's not enough anymore to be not racist and to be sat at home going, it's fine, I'm not racist. You have to be actively anti-racist. Protesting is refusing to stay silent in suffering. Protesting is so important because it's the embodiment of enough is enough. Protesting is demanding change and not stopping until we get it. And the importance of protest means that people like Trump and Boris Johnson can't ignore us, because we won't let them. We're outside their homes, we're outside their offices, the White House, you know, number 10, we're relentlessly shouting out and screaming out for what we're fighting for. And protesting is the start of a revolution. This has to be a revolution. I keep saying that word because, and I don't use it lightly, because it's not, like I say this as well, Black Lives Matter isn't a trend that's going to die down, okay? And I think that's something that you were kind of commenting on as well, Yaz, that it's not about, okay, now they've got their chance to speak and they're going to speak and then it will die down and it will be fine. That's not, we can't let that happen. We have to continuously protest and fight that whole idea that this is just a trend that's here for now and gone later on. And I think the importance of protest is we can see what it achieves. It does achieve change, no matter how slowly that might be, and it will take a lot of time and effort, and it will take more than just 1 or 2 protests to get that change. But like we saw in Bristol yesterday, we got some change. We got people pull down Edward Colston's statue, the slave trader who was publicly celebrated for so long, and they pulled him down, pushed him into the river, which I think is such a massive achievement. And, you know, I think it's, yeah, that's one of the achievements we can see from protests. Another thing that we can achieve is reform, and we can achieve it if it's unapologetically consistent, and we just can't let our voices drown out. No matter if it's now or in 2 years' time, we need to still be having the same energy being put into our voices and fuel our noise constantly.
Well, I think that bringing that up about the statue being pulled down is a really interesting one, because there's so many views on that. In a way, people are going, you know, it's destruction and it's disobedience, and you're hiding the history. But actually, that was a symbolic moment in a protest movement that said, this embodiment of structural racism cannot be allowed to be celebrated. So, and then for it to be pushed into the river was symbolic. Now, in terms of all the other statues that celebrate slave owners and names of buildings, I think there is an argument to go, okay, we need to create a museum of colonialism where these statues of people that, you know, ran this whole disgusting, brutal, demoralizing, anti-human system is there to be remembered. Because I think we've got a lot to learn from the Holocaust, that if we destroy all of those, we've got to take them off the pedestal, we've got to rename the buildings, but we've got to house those statues, because people won't believe it. We've got to have, you know, all the descriptions of what they did. How many slaves did they own? How many slaves did they remove from their country, from Africa, and bring in, you know, we all know the slave ship images and all that. How many did they, and how much profit did they make, and what did they build with that? And you have to look at buildings in Oxford, part of Oxford University, that are built on the profits of the slave trade. So for me, I definitely thought that the dismantling and toppling of a statue was a symbolic moment in time. But I now want those statues removed, but I want them placed within a place where we can never forget the history, and where history can be taught. The, you know, the degrading history. We can't hide the dark side of British history. And that's, so for me, I feel passionate about that as well. I'm going to come to Lewis on this, and then to you, Rhiannon. So Lewis.
Well, without protest, there's no change, okay? Because imagine the slaves didn't protest. We're still being changed now. Imagine in the civil rights movement, they didn't protest. We still have segregation now. We are here where we are now because of protests. And then we can get a better future by protests. And what you were saying about not completely destroying the statues, I get that, because we can't forget the history. Because the only way to learn is by knowing the history, so we don't repeat it again. So yeah, I agree with putting them in some kind of a museum where people can go there and understand the knowledge and the history of the UK or the US, because we need to educate ourselves in what happened. Because there's a lot of people who don't understand what happened in the past. I remember when I was in school, and there was this girl who I used to hang around with, and she used the N-word, and she didn't really understand what was so bad about her using the N-word. And I said, it's because of slavery, you know that, right? She's like, what do you mean? She didn't really know the history of slavery and the N-word. So I had to sit her down for the whole of my break time to explain to her the history of the N-word and slavery and everything. I shouldn't be having to do that in the school. I shouldn't be having to educate other people about the history and explain to them why they can't say certain words. That shouldn't be my job. And so with protest, and when you go to protest, it's like, it's not just about shouting. It's when you go, like the ones that we've been going to, they've been very educational. You get educated in these protests. It's not like you get educated on the system and you get educated on like other people's experience. And that's the only way to really make change, because without protest, I don't know where we'd be right now. We'd probably still be in chains, or I'd probably still segregation. I'd probably be in a different school, you know. And yeah.
Yeah, Rhiannon, because do you want to talk about why protest?
Yeah, I'll just talk briefly about it. I think obviously like a lot of what you guys have said has pretty much covered it. Like, you're right, you know, what Liz said is right. You can't have change about protests. A lot of the big rights movements that have, you know, like the suffragette movement, like everybody who has rights now because of a movement, there's usually been some kind of protests. Because like you said, you just can't without them. Like, that is the way to change, because it's the quantities of people standing together, like unified. I think that's what it is for me about it. You know, because there's a lot of people at the minute, especially in these conditions, you know, the COVID-19 conditions, who are like, oh, but, you know, we're in a pandemic. And I get that. And I think that, you know, I understand if people want to put their health above, you know, this, as long as they're doing things, you know, alongside that, like petitions and anything else they can. But for me, I'm like, I may be one person, but that's one more body to add to this ever growing body of people asking for change and demanding change. And I think protests are a brilliant way to do that, because it brings people together. Like Lewis said, it's educating, you know, like Anusha said, it brings about these amazing historical moments of change, like with the statues. And I agree with you, Yaz, as well, about housing these statues and not letting that history be forgotten, because like we've all been saying, it comes down to education every time. We need to know not only the colonial histories of what we did, but also what about the histories, the pre-colonial histories. What about those countries before we decided to take over them? Because they have their own culture, and it's so rich, and we don't know about it because we get taught white history and it's just whitewashed, and I'm sick of it. It's boring. I want to know what these other countries were doing before we decided to be dickheads. That's a light way of putting it, because it's bad. But yeah, protest, you know, it's a way forward. Everybody, like, we were literally, it's the most funny thing to me, because me and my housemates were sat, I think it was after, I think there'd been some protests in Southampton and Portsmouth, and we were like, oh, it's so frustrating, because, you know, there's none near here, and we didn't feel like it was worth the risk of COVID to travel further. And then literally the next morning, the first thing that came up on my timeline was protest in Chichester, Saturday the 13th, at this time, this is where it is. And I just messaged my housemate straight away. I was like, we're going, yeah? Because, you know, if you can, and if you can do it safely, I really, really feel that everybody should be doing this. You know, let's all stand together and fight this, because
people have been very respectful. I mean, I don't know so much in London, the crowds, but in Oxford, people been with masks, they've been in groupings, you know, that, and in some way I do understand why people would be more sort of massing, because this is so important, you know. And if you haven't got to go back to a family where there's underlying conditions, then people are putting the protest as something that's more of a priority, because yeah, it's probably not as dangerous, but obviously we've got to be careful. Just coming to our last question about creating the change that we want to see. What, you know, protest is you know, it's from speaking out to protesting. What is the change that we want to see, and what are the next steps of getting there? So yeah, I'll come back to you, Anusha, because I want all of us to speak about this.
Yeah, I think this is a huge question because it goes without saying a lot needs to change. Signing one petition and one petition being successful doesn't cut it. It's not where it stops. All the points I raised earlier in the systemic racism, those are all contributing factors to systemic racism which need to change. It doesn't just need to be acknowledged and publicly recognized by world leaders. It needs to be completely dismantled. It needs to be completely changed to the core, where we're giving each other equal opportunities and that the color of our skin is not a factor in any decisions made on any part. But above all, I think that, putting that to a side, people's attitudes and actions need to change. Like, if you're sat home silent in this time, you are one of the biggest parts of the problem, because I think that no matter how we're making noise, whether that's on social media, by educating each other, by protesting on the streets, we have to continue to make this noise. And I think that if people aren't doing that, that needs to change. And if there's people in our families and friends, like Lewis touched on at the beginning, we need to be the ones to initiate that change within them that makes them want to fight, because we all have to fight for this together. It's not about just Black people speaking up or just one community speaking up. It's about everyone speaking up against this. And I think that what we need to change is our attitude towards learning. We need to make the effort to learn every single name of a Black person who has been murdered at the hands of the police. We need to learn every single name, every single story, and know and say their names and be talking about how cruel and how disgusting and how it was allowed. We need to be having those conversations, as hard as they are and as heartbreaking as they are. We have to have them. And I think we have to turn the shame of staying silent before, speaking on behalf of me and, you know, the South Asian community and white people, we have to turn our shame of staying silent before this into the fuel for our noise. And like I keep saying, it has to be a revolution. It is time for change. It's time for a revolution.
Thank you, Anusha. I mean, God, I've got hope for the future with you guys here. Lewis, what about you?
I want to see the change where, in the future, where I have kids, I don't have to explain to them, yo, when you go out into the world, people are going to hate you because of the way you look. The police are going to try and attack you because of the way you look. The school system is going to try and fail you because of the way you look. I don't have to explain to them what to do if a police officer stops you. I don't want to have to explain to them, yo, when you go to a shop, there's going to be people staring at you, making sure you don't steal because you're Black. I don't want to be explaining these things to my kids, and I don't want my kids to be explaining it to their kids. I want it to stop. I would want it to stop now, but that's being very hopeful, because it means the whole system's got to change. The whole mindset of the world has got to change. And we're getting there gradually. And I hope we get there sooner than expected. But yeah, I just want Black people to be empowered, to not want to feel like they have to change the way they look in order to fit in order to feel beautiful. I want our kings and queens to stand up straight with their heads high, you know? But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I think this is all for all of us. It's, you know, same, because I don't want my children or my children's children to constantly have to look at what they have to do differently. I don't want my children or my children's children to feel like they're not beautiful, that they're not worthwhile, that they're not respected, that they're not loved. And this is, you know, this is what I was set when I did the writing about I'm Crying, is because I cannot see that anymore. And
yeah, exactly. I want to see the inequality of Black people being history, and just history, not present, not future. I just want it to be history. That's something I want to see.
Absolutely. Rhiannon, coming to you last but not least.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously completely agree with everything that's already been said. You know, there's so much that needs to change. Like Anusha said, there needs to be a revolution, because honestly, to me, it's just never going to make sense. And half of that is my white privilege. Like, I'm not going to understand this. I'm never going to understand what Black people go through, or what anybody who isn't white goes through. But also, as a human being, I do not understand how like, what is it? There's no difference to me. You have a different color skin. You're human. And I mean, I try to live kind of, you know, loving everybody, wanting to be treated as they would treat me, you know, treating them as I would want to be treated. Sorry, got confused there. But yeah, so much needs to be changed. And I think that the way to create it is, you know, for me, it comes all the way back down to education all the time. And by protesting, by making our voices heard across social media, you know, just talking to other people, all of it, it's already being shown that it's being listened to. Because how many, you know, yes, 1 or 2 successful petitions aren't enough, but already so many have been successful and changes have been made. I literally had an email from my university today explaining the changes they're going to make to the curriculum and new rules that they're going to follow to make sure that there is diversity throughout our department. And that's in our theatre department. It's brilliant. And it's only the start, obviously, and I'm going to be waiting to make sure that that is what they do. But they're clearly, you know, people are ready to listen. We've just got to keep talking and keep making our voices heard and bring about this change, because it's just so important.
I mean, it's great that you're giving some examples of actual change, because the problem, I mean, I want to pick up on revolution. Do we mean violent revolution? Do we mean peaceful revolution? Do we mean voting? You know, because obviously I do find violent revolution a difficult one, but I'm not saying that what if I was in a situation where it was life and death, I wouldn't react.
But it shouldn't need to be violent. I think that's the other thing that I always think is and that's, you know, we've been shown that across the world, really, that everybody protesting, or for the most part, is trying to do this peacefully and just trying to say, look, just listen to us, because that's a human thing to do. You listen to each other, you use communication to solve your problems and solve these issues. And it's people not wanting to listen. And it shouldn't need to get to that violent stage ever. And it's heartbreaking that it does. And I think that's part of the change that we need to see. We need to keep making change in the most peaceful ways we can, and keep driving forward the fact that all we want is for everybody to be equal and to love each other and to celebrate everybody and celebrate, you know, Black Lives Matter. Like,
but the problem is
simple. It's a simple thing.
It seems so simple, but as I was saying earlier, the difficulty is those in positions of power giving up their power.
Yeah,
because the whole creation of slavery and the oppression of Black people, and then the divisions between us, is all to control us. And so somehow we've got to go, we're not going to be divided. We are not going to allow this. And we also, you know, have to vote in a different way. We have to overturn the voting system if it's not democratic. So there's so much that is still to do, but, you know, it does inspire me. You know, you in Mandala Young Company, it's such a diverse mix of young people. You all have this passion to want to live with humanity and compassion and love. And, you know, if we keep going forwards like this and talking to more of our friends and talking to people that we come in contact with and take action, then it's got to change. It cannot, it's a tipping point. And I've said this before, it might not be tomorrow, it might not be next month, it might not even be next year, but the tipping point is here. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, for speaking out in a brave, educated, knowledgeable and personal way. I'm really proud of you, and we've got another group of young people speaking about this next week on Facebook Live. So yeah, thanks to people who are listening. If you haven't watched it all in one go, I don't blame you, but do comment, do come back and comment with us and talk to us, because that's what we want. We want the dialogue. We're doing this to promote a dialogue, not to stay silent. If you disagree with things that we're saying, talk to us, but don't ignore it. Don't hide away. So thank you, everyone. And yeah, take care, stay safe, stay well. And yeah.